Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Eugene Day. Last time we talked about three major problems affecting EDs, those being crowding, meaning overall throughput challenges because of too many patients arriving, waiting room congestion, which is essentially the inability to get patients sufficiently decanted from the waiting room and into the ED itself. And then finally, ED boarding, which is the challenge of getting patients who are medically ready to be admitted into the inpatient areas in the hospital. All of these throughput challenges are typically related to having so many patients arriving at the ED that you have challenges treating them all in a timely fashion. But there are different valves that you can adjust to address each of the problems. So today I want to talk a little bit about how we can confront each of these problems and some strategies that are used in order to address these difficulties. So the first one, crowding, overall throughput management, too many patients arriving. How can we address this? Fundamentally, this is a queuing theory problem. Queuing theory problems can be solved or improved using fundamentally only one of two strategies. Either you change how many people are arriving for service, or you change how rapidly you service each person on average. Additionally, there is another way that you can address it, which is by minimizing the variation between service times, right? So if you're a cashier at McDonald's, you don't want one customer to take 10 seconds and another customer to take 7 minutes and everywhere in between, and you don't have any reliable way of predicting which is which. You want to narrow that variation. But in the ED, that's much more challenging because there is a natural variation between patients in terms of why they are there. So it's very difficult to manage the variation aspect of it. There are a few things that you can do related to reliable sort of industrial processes like lab turnarounds or radiology turnarounds, but fundamentally variation in patient duration of stay is not controllable, but average length of stay is, or at least it is, if not controllable, it's at least improvable. So to improve overall average length of stay, you need to eliminate the time that patients are waiting for things. This is fundamentally in sort of lean management, what we would think of as non-value added time, unnecessary non-value added time, or waste. Now, this occurs at times when the patient is simply unable to progress in their care because the physicians and the nurses in the ED don't know what to do for them next because they are waiting on things like labs to come back, or they are waiting on the ability to place them into a room which is occupied by a patient who isn't receiving active care because they are medically ready for discharge, but not able to leave that occupied space yet, typically because they're waiting to be admitted to the hospital. So one strategy that a lot of EDs use to eliminate some of that waiting time is to order labs from triage. There's a lot of EDs now that are placing providers at triage, meaning either an advanced practice provider like a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant, or even a physician, often a telemedicine physician, at triage who can see patients, order labs that they know they're going to need. And that way the labs get started even if there's not a room available yet. And then when the physician is able to finally see the patient in a room, they already have lab results on the way, or ideally even back already. And that can be an effective way of reducing overall length of stay. But in order to really manage length of stay at most sort of what we would think of as ternary or quaternary care hospitals, you need to manage ED boarding, which was the second major challenge that we talked about, which is when patients are medically ready to be admitted to the hospital, but there isn't an inpatient bed available for them, or there isn't an inpatient physician able to take report, and they don't have the ability for that patient to vacate the ED. Ideally, what we need to solve this is a whole hospital holistic solution. There needs to be sufficient staff and sufficient bed space in the inpatient areas to accept the patients coming in from the ED. There needs to be sufficient capacity in the perioperative suite, the operating rooms, the cath labs that can accept emergent and urgent patients from the emergency department. That's a major challenge. There's a lot of different reasons for that. Some of them are systemic and structural, some of them are political, and it becomes very difficult to approach that. So, one of the ways that a lot of EDs are beginning to approach this is by creating their own managed observational ED boarding areas. So, patients who are medically ready for admission, who have admission orders entered into the EMR, will be transferred to a separate unit where they are overseen by nursing and maybe an advanced practice provider, maybe a physician, hospitalist, maybe an ED doc, perhaps a resident, who are able to monitor them for decompensation and provide whatever care they need while they're being observed until there is an inpatient bed available for them. This results in the patient being decanted from the main ED and those care areas that are needed to take care of patients who are in the waiting room, which is the third major challenge that we will talk about in a moment. The problem with creating these observational areas is that they are very expensive to build and you need additional staff. And so you really need a system which will benefit from this. And that's going to result from your admission rate, from your population demographics. Not every ED needs to build one of these, even if they have inpatient admission challenges. A separate boarding area for ED admissions is not necessarily going to be the right thing, and they're very expensive. So that's a situation where you really need to model that ahead of time and understand how that's going to impact the dynamics of your system before you just agree to spend millions and millions and millions of capital dollars on building a new facility. So that's how you can address ED boarding. That's one way you can address ED boarding. But like I said, ideally, we would have an inpatient facility that is capable of accepting those patients and is planned and managed around accepting those patients. And that's a much more sophisticated challenge that relates to every different subsystem in the hospital. So finally, there is the waiting room congestion. Waiting room congestion is a real problem because patients arrive, they see a crowded waiting room, and they go home. And this is not just the patients who are only mildly ill. This is patients having heart attacks, having strokes. Patients make terrible decisions when they see a really crowded waiting room. Patients die in the waiting room sometimes. And that, of course, is an absolute tragedy for that patient and that family. And it's a tragedy for the hospital. There are almost invariably lawsuits associated with that. So it's a big risk and liability problem. And when hospitals lose lawsuits in those situations, they lose the resources that they need to provide care to other patients. And so we really want to make sure that that waiting room is not too congested most of the time. Now, of course, relieving waiting room congestion means greater ability to bring patients back into the ED itself, which relates to all of the problems that we've already discussed. Crowding is a problem, boarding is a problem, but there are other things that you can do to reduce waiting room congestion that don't necessarily increase capacity for the emergency care areas. One of them is building fast track. This is essentially creating a separable urgent care environment in the emergency department. So it's like instead of just having the emergency room where they can take care of patients with heart attacks and strokes and gunshot wounds and things like that, there is also sort of like a Zoom care, urgent care that is separate, which is run by an advanced practice provider or a resident, someone capable of taking care of low acuity patients who are there for needed care, but do not require the advanced life support, life saving resuscitation capability of an emergency department. And they could have gone to an urgent care if one exists near them, or if it is open at the time that they need it. Or they could have gone to family practice if they have access to family practice medicine. But here in America, we have really crappy access to family care medicine. And so Patients like that come to the ED, patients who have the flu, patients who have minor injuries. These patients can consume resources in the emergency department and need to be there because of the way that we practice medicine here in the United States, which is not ideal, but they don't need true emergency level care. They need urgent care. They need family medicine care. And so some EDs are creating what they call a fast track. It's for what we would say ESI 4s and 5s. 4 and 5 are the lowest levels of emergency severity. They don't need resuscitation. They don't need advanced labs. They don't need even imaging, probably. They need to be seen by a care provider who can rapidly prosecute their concern. This enables you to lower the census of the waiting room, move those patients through the system, address their needs, and that allows the waiting room itself to be a more hospitable environment for your sicker patients. So those are the three fundamental strategies that I wanted to talk about, to share, to address the three fundamental problems we talked about last time. There are other strategies. There are other ways of addressing all of these challenges. And it is a very good idea, before investing a large amount of money, like I said before, to build an ED boarding area or a new fast track, to ensure that it's going to have the outcomes that you think it is going to have. And that's where the modeling that I do comes in. So YouTube thinks you are going to love this video right here. I think that you should let me know what your biggest ED problems are, and I would love to have a conversation about how to address them. Thanks a lot. Hope you have a lovely Christmas and a happy new year.